Good morning. My name is Mike DiMaggio, and I am the Vice President in perpetuity here for the Guild of New Hampshire Woodworkers. And it's been my pleasure to serve at the behest of many, many fine presidents, and I look forward to working for Professor Elliott, who has been killing us in the last several weeks, months, with his wonderful woodworking competition. So I anticipate many cardiac arrests in the next 2 years as a result of his working style, but can assure you that we are open for many, many interesting and progressive concepts as we move forward. I would like to make special note that we have a very, very honored guest here today, and I'm sure he's going to be very annoyed that I'm saying this, but for those of you who may not be aware of, Ian Kirby has been a woodworking phenomena for many, many, many years in England and here as well. He's a wonderful teacher. He has written prolifically in the areas of woodworking, furniture making, and it was my honor to meet him many, many years ago at a woodworking symposium in New York. When I walked in this morning, my good friend David Lamb said something about books and such. He goes, Ian Kirby. I said, the Ian Kirby? And he said, yeah. And I was stunned. Mr. Kirby, if you'd be so kind as just to stand. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Ian Kirby. Sir, we are very honored to have you here today, and thank you so much for your participation.
And he has books.
And he has books?
Yeah.
Several of which I own. They're very good books. Every year we have a changing of the guard here for the Guild, and it has been my honor on a few occasions to be the person who provides some of the impetus and reward, so to speak, for that change. For those of you who don't know much about Jon Siegel, he's an architectural turner extraordinaire. He is renowned throughout the country for his architectural turning skills. He's a former furniture master, magnificent furniture maker, and if you've ever had the opportunity to go to his shop, you will see vintage and antique machinery restored to a level that is almost incomprehensible. I would rather eat off of John's machines than off of my kitchen table. That is how clean his machines are. He's really, really remarkable. What I do want to say, though, is that Jon took this position, again, unprecedented. We've never had anyone who has served 2 full terms as president of the Guild, to my knowledge and investigation. I think we've had someone that served like a year and a half, but no one has ever served 2 full terms. And Jon did this because at the point we were at, we did not have a viable option for president. So I really want to thank Jon immensely for his sacrifice, for his wonderful leadership, and all his ideas and all of his concepts that he brought to us and helped us to get to the level that we're on today. I do have a presentation for him, which I hid. There you are. I'm giving you a brand new Mike DiMaggio partially used cloth, which you can use to buff your antique vintage tools. Now this plaque that I lovingly made last night at 3 o'clock in the morning has a special significance because I wrote here, Jon Siegel, President Emeritus. And as many of you know, the title Emeritus is given to a person who's had long-term involvement, either as a professor, a physician, a scientist. And Jon's involvement in the Guild, his willingness always to put the Guild ahead of himself, his generosity of spirit, and especially his willingness to take on a second president's term, I think certainly merited that title. So the plaque reads, the Guild of New Hampshire Woodworkers presents to Jon Siegel, President Emeritus, with appreciation for your long-standing commitment and dedication as President of the Guild of New Hampshire Woodworkers, 2021 to 2023. Thank you, Mike.
I'm glad you didn't buy me a tool.
It's interesting that you say that, because we do have something for you, but it's not a tool.
Oh, besides this?
Yes.
A donut, you get a donut.
Oh, I had my quota.
Now, I knew right from the get-go that it would be totally inappropriate to try to buy John a tool. First of all, he's got every tool known to man, and second of all, I could never get him a tool of the quality that he's used to having. So our mutual good friend Peter James said to me, you know what John would like? John would really like a large, high-definition video monitor because he loves to watch videos. I said, isn't that a wonderful idea? Thank you so much, Peter. Now I don't have to kvetch about what the hell I'm going to get John. So we present to you a large, high-definition monitor.
Yeah, I got my hands.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I spend a lot of time on YouTube.
Well, now you can spend it with much less visual stress.
People restore old machines.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, thank you.
You're welcome. Congratulations.
Speaking of Peter James, spent the day with him yesterday. We went to the Antique Engine Show in Dublin, and he's walking around looking at old tools. You know, he sold all his machines because the doctor gave him bad news. And now he's doing so well, he's buying more machines. So he wanted me to say hi to everybody. So I'm glad I got this chance.
Nice to see such a large crowd here today. I kind of think part of that is because we have David Lamb as our speaker this morning. David is a renowned cabinet maker, actually got his start here at Shaker Village, and he's going to take us through his journey from being a youngster here at Shaker Village through his career to the present day and how he got there. David, as I said, is a renowned cabinet maker. He lives down the road here about a mile, I think.
The next house down.
Next house down. Maybe he'll tell us about how he acquired that house in his shop. David was a New Hampshire Artist Laureate. Recently was a recipient of the Cartouche Award from the Society of American Period Furniture Makers. He's won numerous other design awards. He's been well published in many publications, even in places like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, New Hampshire Home Magazine. It's been featured on several TV programs and contributed to several books on Shaker furniture. David goes back a long way. He was one of the founders of this guild. And has known Jon Siegel for many years. And I asked Jon to say a few words.
Thanks. Just about 30 seconds here. I first met David Lamb on the day that the guild was born. And that was when we had our first meeting at John McAlevy's shop in Warner. And about 12 people met on that day. And so we started with 12, now we have 750. But David and I found out we had more interests in common than just woodworking. We also both loved old machines. So the next thing I know, David and I are running off on these expeditions. Oh, John, I found out this old mill. There's abandoned machines in this mill. Let's go check that out. And we'd go to Wolfboro or we'd go to Lakeport. I remember this one mill in Lakeport where there were just 3 or 4 old metalworking machines. And we were lowering the line shafting down from the ceiling. All we had were ropes. There were just the 2 of us. And then we're lowering these 1,000-pound machines down the stairs. What I'm getting at is that, well, I learned so much from that and fell in love with old machines and the history of machine technology and the Industrial Revolution in New Hampshire. That to get where David has got, and maybe I hope I've gotten somewhere, it takes courage and imagination to make it happen. Say, oh, what we could do with this machine. No, the people left those machines there because they thought they were 100 years old and they're worthless. but we knew. But it takes imagination to know, and it takes imagination to make things happen. It takes imagination to, I'm sure he'll tell you the story of disassembling a building and then reassembling it in your backyard to make a shop. All of these things take courage and imagination, and this is what I learned from David.
Thanks, John. All right. Well, thank you for that nice introduction. You guys are a great group. As John said, I went to the original meeting, the gathering meeting of the formation that turned out to be the formation of this organization all those years ago, and there were a dozen of us, and now look at this group. It's really fantastic, and the amount of energy that I'm seeing, the development of it, the expansion of it, and you know what you guys are dreaming of. I think it's great, and it, in many ways, it is all about dreams. Whether it's you're part of an organization or you're thinking about your career, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. Is my career. It just kind of happened, and I'm calling it more than just woodworking, because it is. Who you are as an individual, as a craftsman, as an artist, is an accumulation of all your experience. It's not just your training at the bench. It's where you live, it's what you do, what your other interests are, who you know, like what John said, our adventures hunting down old machines and restoring them and collecting them. And I hope you all come to my shop sometime to see my row of bandsaws. And I mean a row of bandsaws. I have 8 36-inch and 48-inch diameter wheeled bandsaws. And so it's a collection, and it's not just a collection because I need to use bandsaws, but it's a collection because I'm intrigued by the aesthetic. I'm intrigued by the artistry of it and its local history. These are all made in New Hampshire. It was a relatively small company, but I thought it was significant. And so this is where your head and your interest goes. It does take courage to collect these things and have a place to put them. That's why I took that building down in Belmont and moved it down so I have a place for my machines. But it's all about my environment. Anyway, I could go up. There are a million tangents. But let's try to focus here. I wanted to focus primarily on my time here. So it was in 1972 that my family arrived here at the village. I'm a New Hampshire native, always lived in state except for college. And my mother had divorced and remarried a man that was working here. His name was Bud Thompson. And so we came here in 1972 as a new family. Bud had already been here since around 1950. And so we lived not as Shakers, but as employees, I guess, of the Canterbury Shakers in what's known as the East House, also called the Children's House, on the eastern edge of the village. And at that time, there were still 6 Shakers remaining, still living here, all elderly women, but wonderful people. And so, while not Shakers ourselves, we became very close, and you know, just I found I was absorbing things, you know, listening to their stories, the story of this place. I just had a thought flash into my head that looking out on the street, my brother Steve and I would wait at the end of the gate here, and we went to high school up at Belmont High School. And we get on the bus and all the kids would yell out, "Hey, Shaker boys," you know. And that kind of got on our nerves, but it's kind of a badge of pride after a time. Our good friend and neighbor, Teresa Wyman, who was next door up the street, she's here today. And hearing my story, she's followed me and been a supporter of what I do for a long time, but I bet there are going to be a lot of things she hasn't seen in this program. But it's great to have her support. So within a year of moving here, the next door neighbor, where I lived down at the bottom of the hill, I think many of you, if you came from the south, you went by my place with a little cape and a shop and a sign, was the residence and workspace of Alejandro de la Cruz. And he was an immigrant from Madrid. And he left Spain during the Spanish Civil War, made his way to South America, and eventually, through a multitude of reasons, came to Canterbury and settled. The house that he and now I and my wife live in was a Shaker building. And he was living in another house nearby and approached Eldress Emma, who was the eldress of the village at the time. Again, this is 1949, 1950. Approached them about buying the house. It was abandoned at that time, but he would go by that house on his daily walk and see it, and he said, someday I'm going to make my career there. So after, a lot of give and take, he was able to acquire the house. But she wouldn't sell the house on the property, so he had to buy the 2 acres across the street, and then he was going to move the house. Well, by the time papers are passed and money was exchanged, she says, all right, you can have the house, and blah, 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 which is kind of a little interesting story. But anyway, he was trained the old way in Madrid. He worked under 2 different masters himself. And when he invited me to come down, that's another little story which I have to interrupt and say, I never sought out to be a furniture maker. I didn't knock on his door knowing what he did, saying, could you teach me? I want to learn. He saw something in me and invited me to come. Al, you mentioned being emotional about talking about one topic you had, and I get emotional thinking about that and how unusual that is. It's circumstance, it was meant to be, it's luck, it's all those things. And so now I lost my train of thought. But anyway, there's a lot to say. Oh, so I was down there for 3 years. I had a 3-year term starting when I was within a year of coming here. So I was 14 and a half, almost 15. Started to go down there. It was, because I'm in school, it was a weekend thing. I would go down on Saturdays. And sometimes Teresa would give me a ride home afterwards if she saw me walking on the street. So it was 3 years of concentrated handwork. I never made or contributed to any of his work. I was more like a student, even though he called me an apprentice. My bench was next to his. I could see what he was doing. He would stop, take the time, explain to me what he's doing, whether it's a slant front desk or a small end table. It didn't matter what it was. He would take the time and explain things to me, and we'd look into books, textbooks and history books, and we'd talk about why one thing was good design, why one other thing was not good design, all those kinds of things, as well as talking about how important it is and what it means to be a craftsman. He would roll that word off his tongue in the Spanish way. He had a very heavy accent. Craftsman, he would really emphasize that. It was very important. And he referred to a lot of contemporary stuff. This is early 1970s. He thought a lot of it was junk because it wasn't thought through, but he also recognized a lot of it was very good work. What he was trying to impress upon me was that you needed to put a lot of thought and not just make something on a lark, but to be serious about what you're doing, the highest intent, the highest standard, and to live your career that way. And so what happened with me was during those 3 years, hearing the stories about Madrid when he was a boy, and the bleeding finger kind of stories that he would have as an apprentice himself, he saved me from that dread. But he did expect me to learn on a very repetitive way, where The only way you're going to learn how to be a great concert pianist is if you practice all the time. So my day down there, from beginning to the end of the day, was cutting dovetails. That was pretty, aside from sharpening, the dovetail was the first real thing. And I'd cut corners, and I'd show it to them. All right, cut them off, do it again. All day long for 3 years. So not just dovetails and every possible variation thereof, but mortise and tenon and frame and panels, all using hand tools, all at the bench. No table saw, no bandsaw, none of that stuff. He would prepare some stuff for me with his planer, just to prepare it so I can do what was important. So I was never making anything, but I was practicing my scales. I was learning how to do it, and I think it was also a matter of him putting all this on me to see if I had it in me to do it. Because if you're going to go into this as a career, which didn't take me long to decide that's what I intended to do, then you need to know what it's like to work, and to work hard, and work continuously. And my wife, who is here today, can attest that I work very hard. And in the 37 years we've been married and working together, I'm always working. I'm always out in the shop. Not just because of what I need to do, but because I love what I do. So let's see. So the other thing he encouraged me to do is to look at things critically and in detail. And it was always been second nature to me, because as a kid, I always loved fishing, especially fly fishing, which my grandfather taught me. And you spend your time on the water, mostly on streams, reading the water, looking at the trees, and understanding the relationship between rocks and eddies and pools and trees and the bugs coming down or the bugs coming up, and matching the hatch and all that stuff. It's very detail-oriented, and tying flies, tiny little things. And that's what woodworking is, way more than just dovetails. I need to emphasize, you can cut a dovetail, good for you. You've got a hell of a lot more to learn. And that is, one thing is being attuned to detail. So I want to start talking about Shaker Village. So what I quickly found, my stepfather Bud, he was in charge of telling the tour, telling the story of the Shakers to people that would come. And in those days, this was a very active, very attractive kind of place for tourists to come. Outdoor museums have lost a little bit of their shine of late, so it's a struggle for all outdoor museums, including places like Williamsburg and Strawberry Bank. So they always need to think about reinventing themselves. But the amount of people coming through here had been tremendous. And so I would hear his stories. I would hear his lecture. In fact, my first year after graduating from high school, he had me be a tour guide for one fall. So is that something I wanted to do? No. I really didn't like having to do that kind of thing, but what I learned from that is trying to feel comfortable in front of people, expressing yourself, and telling a story. It's very important, especially if you're going to be operating a business like mine, where you have to be able to talk about what you do and why someone might want it. So being here in this fantastic facility, as Mike DiMaggio was emphasizing, you're surrounded by 18th and 19th century structures. Each one tells a story, and it's classical architecture and it's vernacular architecture. What's unique about a lot of Shaker stuff is that it's so thoughtful. Things were done for a reason. Sometimes things were changed, but there are oftentimes very quirky things. and also very interesting things. You know, look at this staircase. I mean, there are things hidden in this village, and if this organization gets more involved, which I really hope it does, that you'll be able to get within some of the structures and see some of these areas that aren't common or aren't typical. Like this is in the dwelling house, and you see some wonderful turning that might seem simplistic or mundane, but it's fascinating the way that they used form and shape to fulfill a space, and the utter simplicity, not simple to the point of square, but simple with all sorts of shapes. I mean, look at those banisters and railings. They're exquisite. And these are things you find, and unexpectedly. The other thing you will see are things like this. This is in the attic of the dwelling house. It's the 1837 structure, and this is on the 3rd floor, and this was just for storage in their general space. So this was a long row of drawers and cabinets and cupboards on both sides of the hallway. Mind you, this is in the attic. All these drawers, if you can imagine how busy it kept a number of craftsmen, all hand-planed, all dovetailed, all hand-turned knobs, and just beautiful work. And I found that being around this kind of stuff, the thoughtfulness is what rubbed off on me. The order, the symmetry, or the asymmetrical things, like this counter. I mean, you will find things, this is a modest size, they call them counters. They were used for tailoring counters. Sometimes these were up to 12, 14 feet long. And they would have drawers, and they would have wheels. So you'd pull them away from the wall to work at it. And there'd be a set of drawers and cupboards on one side, drawers and cupboards on the other side, a different arrangement of each. And you see how, you know, the alignment of the drawers on the right are so much smaller than the ones on the left, and that's like a form follows function kind of thing, and not that everything, whatever you do on the left and the right, have to be the same, but it was very thoughtful and organized in an asymmetrical but balanced way. And I just find this stuff very intriguing. And you ask yourself questions like, why? And then sometimes a piece will have a drop leaf in the back because they needed it. It could increase the space 25 or 30%. And sometimes there would be a door on the end of the panel, the panel end of the cabinet, or a drawer. A lot of you people may be familiar with Garrett Hack's work. Beautiful work, very delicate. Well, much of his initial work was inspired by Shaker work, and those delicate aspects, those very unexpected places to put a drawer or details. And he and I share that commonality of detail and interest. These things are awesome. These are pails. These are a very ordinary item. The pond directly behind here. The Shakers had a series of ponds. They had 7 ponds, and each one had a mill on it or 2. And the turning mill pond is directly behind us. And they had a 3-story building where was full of lathes. And they would turn out things like pegs and other things, but also pails. So this was stave-built pails, and they were also turned to perfection. The lid was turned, the knob was turned, and what you see here is not just a beautifully made pail, but look at the ironwork, look at the delicacy of that, and the attention to detail, and the sensitivity of everything. And I think that's what sets a lot of the Shaker work apart from what you could get from other makers. And there were pail shops all over the place back in those days. Not that other people couldn't do beautiful work, it's just they had a tendency to do spectacular work. This is Brother Delmer Wilson. He was actually from Sabbath Day Lake, Maine, Shaker community. There were 19 communities throughout the country. But I picked this photograph because I wanted to reference what John had said and what's important to me. I just love the aesthetic of these old things, pulleys, and And that was something that was new to me when I came here, was the overhead line shafting in the laundry and the adjacent shop where then I later had a shop. But look at what's stacked up in the background. Those are all oval boxes. And this was his yearly production. And this old Fay and Egan 2-knife square head planer could plane hard maple to a 1/16 of an inch. And he's not spending time throwing it through a time saver or anything like that, or using a random orbit. It's going straight through the planer, maybe a quick little scrape or two. But I just found that remarkable, and it told me that you don't need the latest and greatest. You can use a very high quality piece like that. And so that translates into when you're starting, to buy a $10,000 36-inch table saw, which would have been in 1976 for me, was highly unlikely. I'm not going to spend that kind of money. So I was buying used old stuff from factories, and hey, 1890 is good for me. And it's virtually the same thing, different bearings, but otherwise not much has changed. So that was very instrumental in my progress. And then the third part that was really inspirational to me here was the natural beauty. This is the turning mill pond looking up towards the village. And the colors around here are spectacular. My wife and I walk around this pond sometimes twice a day, morning and evening with our dog. And we're always walking around looking at stuff. And so the natural aspect is truly inspirational. You know, winter time just as much so, with moving water and birds and animals and wildlife. And things like this would catch my eye. And I don't know why, always. Sometimes it hits you deeper and sometimes it comes out later. It's hard to understand, but this is just ice forming on the pond. And, you know, in its fractal, angular nature, which I just found fascinating over the years. So what I learned about shaker design and furniture is that it is not just square tapered leg tables. It is not uninteresting. It is not utter simplicity to boredom. It is not uninspired, and it is not colorless. And hopefully some of those images I showed to you addressed all those things. I think anyone that spends time here can certainly feel inspired. Well, it's not high style work. It's not carved and inlaid. It's a credible attention to detail. This was my first shop. Well, my first real shop. My first space when I was an apprentice was in the cellar of the East House. And it was after my weekends down at Dela Cruz's shop. Then during the week, I would come up and I'd have to practice. He would expect me to practice during the week after school. I had a bench downstairs. And my wife, who I dated in high school, she would want to come over, we'd get together, and I said, well, I've got to practice. Well, it's all right. And she came down and had to endure my time at the bench while I'm chopping dovetails and doing stuff like that, my practice. So you really did have to commit yourself. But what I loved about this shop, this was on the east end of the laundry building, was that this shop was fitted out in the 19th century. There's me. In the 19th century as a woodworking shop. But it had great natural light. You know, you can see all those windows downstairs. And my bench was right in front of it. It was fantastic. And it looked out over the gardens. And while I was not part of the tour, I was certainly accessible from a tourist that would come by. And eventually, that enhanced my business quite a bit. That I would meet people, they saw what I was doing, and they would commission furniture. So, there's me, I'm doing a shaker-type table. And by then I had started collecting old machines. There's an old bandsaw and joiner right here in the foreground, which are kind of hard to see. But, you know, I'm a young buck here, hand planing wood. That's what I had to do, you know. And, you know, you stack up the drawer parts and you start chopping away. And so I was doing a lot of work like this, and learning a lot. You know, I found that when you're doing stuff, this can't always be pigeonholed as reproduction, because oftentimes there's so many variables and variations that you can do to a piece, whether it's a shaker-inspired piece or a Philadelphia highboy or a New Hampshire Dunlap chest on chest. There's always something you can put in. And that was something that my mentor instilled in me, was that, yes, even though you may be doing traditional work, you need to leave your own footprint. You need to leave your mark and express who you are as a craftsman. And I feel you can do that in this kind of work, in the layout, in the proportion, in the detail of the turnings, et cetera, et cetera. So just to reiterate the traditional part, this was my first case piece. I was in high school when I made that, in the cellar of the East House. So we still have it. It's in my daughter's room. But it was a major step forward. I made this when Alejandro and his wife took 6 months and went to Madrid and Spain for a sabbatical. And I thought, I'm going to make something, hopefully that'll impress him when he comes back. And I think it did, but he told me later that, oh, blah, blah, blah. You know, he's telling me all these things that I did wrong, which is good, because you need to hear those things. And then this kind of thing. This is a shaker sewing desk. It's one of their brilliant executions, I think. It's based on neoclassical work, like federal inspired, or rather federal furniture made in the Boston, the Salem, and Portsmouth areas. They took a basic box-on-box kind of form and made it their own. I don't know if you can see it here in this photograph, but there are drawers on this end. So they would have drawers set up. This was for handwork, there was no machine inside. So they had drawers for different uses. So, you know, it was very specific, and it was a storage masterpiece. And typically these things were made in pairs, because the Shaker sisters would use them in their workspace, and they would work together in that there would be one desk here back to back, and so they would be mirror images of each other. And as it ended up, I would make, I don't know, I made maybe a dozen of these things, and they're, on the outset they look kind of simple, but they are very sophisticated in that each mortise and tenon, and you can tell that there are a lot of mortise and tenon joints there. There's an integral cock beating to each member. So there's a cock beat on left and right, or top and bottom, you know, here and here, here and here, here and here. So when they come together, you actually have 3 joints. You have the, you know, the butt and then 2 miters, and that all comes into play at once. You're not cutting that thing in with a router after the fact. You're doing it intentionally as part of your joinery. So these are all learning experiences for me. Whether traditional or Shaker. And so while I was here at Shaker Village, I didn't feel like I can't make traditional stuff here, because that was part of my training. At the same time, okay, get this, at the same time, I went, right after high school, I went to Boston University, and I studied furniture design in a contemporary school called the Program in Artisanry, headed by Jerry Osgood and Alphonse Mattia. And these were leaders of contemporary design, among others, including our friend Ian Kirby in the back, who was a contemporary of theirs. And so I'm surrounded by this heavy traditional teaching, Shaker directness and pared down design, and then contemporary stuff. And I tell you, my head was spinning. And I would have these internal arguments about what's the right direction? What do I do? So it was very challenging for me as a young craftsman to kind of sort all that out. But I did, and it happens, and it doesn't happen right away. I didn't abandon one to go to the other. I tried to incorporate all those things together. So this was a point of transition. This is Alejandro and his wife Lolita, my wife Janet, and me. This was 1986 when he and his wife retired and moved back to Spain. And Janet and I, pretty much at the same time, were packed up our stuff, moved down to the house, set up the shop, and don't we look like puppies? But to me, it was a very significant thing. It was like the handshake, you know, all right, boy, you're ready. Something to get emotional about, that's really something. I can't impress upon you how important that was to me. After hearing him rolling off his tongue all these things about craftsmen and blah, 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 and that, you know, Europeans have traditions, Americans have no traditions. Anybody can hang up a shingle and call themselves whatever they want. In Europe, it's a different story. So I really took that seriously. I didn't dare hang up my little sign, which was that big, when my shop was back there, until I had been doing this for 7 years as an apprentice and a student in college. Then I hung up my little David Lamb cabinet maker sign back there, and that was before this. So this was the shop as it looked in 1980, the house, as it looked in 1986. You'll see it again 37 years later, after a point. And this was the workshop, little 24 by 40 foot shop, had everything he needed. So I walked in, he says, all right, get to work, you know, so that's what I did. That's what we did. Our first job, moving in there, was one that actually I secured in 1985. St. Paul's Church in Concord. It's right next door to the State House. And they had a devastating fire with the whole structure. It was a 1870s American Gothic church, totally gutted. So we were hired to design and build like 15 altar pieces. And so this was the pulpit. And what was significant to me was that this, you know, not only is it classical in nature, but it allowed me the chance to create some carving and design, some good relief work, which the same general format is carried on 35 plus years on. Very important. In fact, I had to delay an important customer, which she likes to remind me every single time I see her, that I had to put her off for a year or two to do this job. But I just felt it was so important to do this kind of very public kind of job before doing her desk. And she's become my greatest client. We're working on piece number 29 and 30. They're in the design phase, but we just delivered piece 28. And she's in Nashua, but she's fantastic. I'll tell you a little more about her in the future. So having people walk in off the street that come up here and take a tour and see my sign, and this lady comes in, she's from Boise, Idaho. She looks around and says, now this is a real cabinet shop. And she was dealing with antiques and seeing my work, and she commissioned a whole series of things. And again, so this is a Newport, Rhode Island design, knee-hole desk, and it's a learning experience. Yes, it's 18th century. And yes, it's been done before, but as a craftsman, to be able to successfully do something like that and really make it your own at the same time, you know, there wasn't one done, but this was from the family of the Goddard and Townsends, and they made dozens of these things. But they're all different. Goddards had their shops, Townsends had their shops, they were intermarried. They've been doing this for decades. Things evolve and change in design. So it allowed me the chance to look at something and try to make it the best it could be. You know, so that means tweaking, you know, I mean, to the point of like the carved shells. There could be 11 lobes, there could be 13 lobes, there could be 12 lobes, and I'm referring to the convex and concave shapes here. And so there are all these little decisions when you put them all together, makes for a good piece or a great piece. And my goal was to make a great piece. Or something like this. This is a New Hampshire piece, the Dunlaps. And again, they did very bold designs, but there are all sorts of variations that could be done. And so I would have these opportunities and relish the opportunity of doing good work. Remember, this was all that we had. My wife and I, this is what we did. I didn't have a second job. She didn't have a second job. We didn't have a trust fund or anything else. Our living was off the bench. So I would take these commissions as this is as good as it gets. This is beautiful work. And to be able to do it and to make a very successful career from it is something I'm very proud of. This was the first piece I did. This was what the church job delayed. And this is Diane Griffith in Nashua. So again, it was a great way to express my personal design vision in something. And this, these things don't come out of a book. They don't come purchase plans. Everything gets drawn full size, make my patterns, templates, all that kind of thing. Again, another wonderful opportunity, someone that I've done a lot of work with. This is the Lendl family in Connecticut, and this is a Duncan Fife style piece, if you're familiar with the form. It's pre-Regency, late federal, we call federal, that's the American term, neoclassical, but very complex, very challenging joinery, carving everywhere. And I thought, oh, how hard can this be to do all this caning? Well, I subbed out the caning, but just drilling the holes for this thing. I mean, under the cushion, it's all caned. And the holes are blind, too. They go in from two different directions. So you tie the knots, and they're all hidden in the back. And they're, it's not all like a porcupine in the back. It's all very neatly done. And so there are a number of pieces, this one including the next one, I learned to collaborate. Yes, sir?
The medallions, the lion-head medallions, are those carved and gilded?
No, those are actually a brass backplate for a loop pull. They're English made, but we got rid of the pull and filled in the holes and kind of reworked them. But that would be typical of what they would put there. But they weren't available in that form, so pretty much had to make them or retrofit. But I would collaborate with people. I found it very important, just like in the old days. You had specialists that would gild and upholster and carve and inlay and all that kind of stuff. I did as much of that as I could, but I would work with people like Mark Adams, who lives in Leominster, New Hampshire. He was a conservator. He would do stuff for the Metropolitan Museum, and he knew how to make things look old if he was doing restoration work. For museum work, it's very specific. So we would do a lot of work together. Or my friend Chance Anderson, who lives in town here, he did stonework. And to do stuff like this, again for Diane Griffith, but inside corners, carving stone by hand, and this is stone cock bead, which is very challenging to do. Stone doesn't bend too well. And these still have joints, where they come together. And this is 3/16 of an inch thick, and your grooves that you plowed in to set this stuff, everything needs to align. The chance to do some beautiful carving, and again, this isn't from the book, this is out of my head, based on my client's interests and my interests. Oh, I want to point that out, that while, let's see, this whole bit about expressing yourself as a craftsman and not just doing what someone wants, people would typically come to me with a book or a magazine. I want that. Well, that's what they think they want. So it's your job as a craftsman to say, yeah, I can do that, but let's consider this. You know, you kind of work with them, talk to them about what's important in the design, and gradually shift them over to your way of thinking. And that always happens. I've been very fortunate with that, not to get stuck with something that you really don't want to make. So this becomes a very important thing. And then this lady, Diane, she is at the point where she just wants me to, all right, what can you do for me here? And I would always prepare like, well, we could save money if we didn't have all these drawers, or we could save money if we didn't do this carving. That's not what you wanted to hear. It took me 20 or 25 years to understand that. What more can you give me? What else can you do? So she was really pushing me to be the craftsman, to come up with unique ideas, to put more time into it. She was willing to pay. So this kind of inside corner break front type of hall table was a very unusual form, but it seemed like the answer to a narrow hallway. You couldn't have anything too deep, but if you didn't do that with the 6 legs, it would look too stretched out and so on and so forth. So it was just great opportunities. And I'm still doing things like this at the time, you know, a shaker type of piece, wonderful way to express some beautiful material and simplicity, simple, but not boring, right? There's beautiful frame and panel on the ends, which have beautiful, delicate cock beating, all mitered and all that. And it's just, and cantilevered top. That's another wonderful shaker kind of attribute. This, believe it or not, is all cherry, even though it's yellow. Shakers did so much that was colored. You look in the room in here in the woodwork, it's all red. 9 times out of 10, their work, whether furniture or architectural, was red or yellow or green or blue, not just natural. That happened after the fact when taste changed. They would strip it and varnish it and so forth. But I loved the opportunity to experiment with some color. So this was translucent yellow wash that was put over cherry. So you could still see the figure through it, but you had that overall impact of color of yellow. So then there became this important transition. And this happened in the 1990s, about the time when the Guild formed, and then a couple years later, the Furniture Masters formed. It's kind of interesting how those groups formed. First there was the League, we've been here forever. And then a few of us felt, you know what, they don't know how to sell furniture. Because it's not just hundreds of dollars. I mean, you're talking sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. And that's nothing you sell at the Sunapee Fair. So, you know, the Guild was a fantastic thing. It's education only. So that's why we formed the Furniture Masters, was to try to educate the public and sell this high quality work to the public. So anyway, these transition things, so you start to express yourself and come up with your own designs. And I think these early tables of mine really kind of show that transition with me where, yes, definitely, this is rooted in neoclassical work, but the way I'm approaching it, the quiet ways I'm doing it, make it mine, make it different. The moldings, the turnings, the, you know, everything about it. And then this piece is really sort of the culmination of a lot of that design thought. This is a demi-lune. I've done a lot of these demi-lunes. And this is really the highest form of that. It's a little taller than normal because of the use. But it's got a concave shaped apron. So here there's the case of veneering in 2 directions at once. You know, you're bending around and you're bending concave. And that's why I started to develop the patterning that you see in the front of the apron. It's a series of shield shapes, and then the opposite shape. And I got looking at that the first time I did it. And I said, that's when some of these shaker things came back to me. It's like, you know what? That looks just like the fingers on an oval box. And I remember the story that was told about why they did that with shaker oval boxes was to reduce the chance of shrinking and this and that. And by piecing it together, you're allowing the wood to move more flexibly. So I love that reference, that old reference that most people wouldn't see, but to that shaker origin. And then there's carving, and there's veneer work on the top, and that wonderful bracing down below. It's not so much structural bracing as it is a visual format. It's to fill a space. It's to cause interest in your eye. I'd look at these old books by the Sack brothers, who would write books on antiques, and they would describe, formats of furniture form that, these things were meant to draw the eye up. And so I'm fulfilling a space and also bringing your eye up to the top and to the important details. So these are all things you learn. And the intersection of the shapes too. So the leg top is cylindrical, and with the way it intersects with this concave apron creates the same Gothic arch shape in the inlay on the leg, on the apron. So all these things interplay, and they just kind of echo back and forth. The subtle carving on the legs do the same thing. Remember the ice picture on the pond? That inspired this kind of work. This is birch dyed black and done in a fractal pattern in a way to try to echo that whole formation of ice that you see on ponds. I just became fascinated by it. And talk about joinery. There are, 100 pieces just in the tabletop. Each one is different. I don't have a pattern and cut everything out with a jig the same way and have them all pieced together. Every single one is its own piece, has its own pattern, and is cut and assembled and built out. Then things like settees. Remember that fabulous Duncan Fife couch? And if you noticed, the shape between the arms and the back had that saddle, that sort of curved saddle. So I really love that little detail and used that in the form of this thing. And again, my Gothic arch is showing up that I do with the inlay. And I do a lot of carving. So this back and the arms had carved detail. In this case, it was my flowering crabapple right outside my shop window that I use as a inspiration for those carving patterns. And then I had the opportunity to do a different version, same patterns as the previous piece, and the layout, everything's the same except it's birch and it's veneered. So totally different effect from cherry and carved, birch and veneered, same patterns. And it's fun to express and see things. And then kind of related but different is this sofa. Again, great veneer work, carvings on the ends of the head and foot. But it's really kind of a tour de force. This is the dining table. This thing expands to 10 feet. So there's 2 leaves that go in. It's about 7 feet long there. And, I'm continuing this use of these arches and these elements that, while the whole thing has a very historical aspect to it, you won't ever find a table like that in history. So I'm trying to pull all these things together. The columns, yeah, they're classical, but it's stuff that I saw all around this place too. This is the library table for our friend Diane. Again, and this was just like one of those things you could really sink your teeth into. Incredible veneers. These are all Cuban mahogany veneers. And utility in the drawers and so forth. So what appears to be a rail framing the top of the drawer actually slides out and whole is a book support, and there was one on each side. This leather faced, and I had to make all the brass hardware to support it, and it's a book support. And things like that really gets you to think. You're talking about these things, these rails here, that's only a ½ inch you have to work with, and you're supporting maybe a reference book. So that's when you think, all right, what's going to do that? Pine? No. Mahogany? Probably not. So cocobolo, that's a very dense, very hard wood. And so that's what we did. I also wanted to, oh yeah, okay. I forget to point out that the carvings, that I really relish the opportunity to do carvings. And these, again, are things that either grow in the yard at our house, in the garden, or they're wild. And this could be a blue flag or an iris, same kind of plant. And when I had a chance to carve turnings, I would do a morning glory motif. And so we have bindweed, which is a native morning glory, and morning glory itself, and utilize that. And each post you see there is similar but different. And I really like that idea of similar but different. It's like an asymmetrical design aspect. There were a series of pieces like this, and I'm sure you can see how Shaker influence and design would come into this, being a fairly straightforward design, but it had a little bit of carving down those canted corners in the upper cabinet. It's just a collections chest, just a simple, about 4 feet tall. Simple. The drawer fronts are serpentine. So they're, making forms, laminate that, veneer all that. Complex joinery. But the outward goal was to make it look simple. It wasn't about showing off the joinery, showing off dovetails, but like sophisticated work in the 18th and 19th century, most of it was hidden. And that was the direction I was taking. This is another version of the same format, except with a cabinet on the top. And then when you open the inside, you have another cabinet to put things, or a couple of drawers. But this was mostly a study in doing this black ice thing, like you saw on that tabletop, and the fractal geometry of the overlay, and dyeing. And it takes a lot of nerve to take a white, barely golden colored wood and spray it black. That's a hard thing to do. But if you do it right, the effect is really cool. And then the legs were curly maple and dyed the same way. And then the third version of this was something we just finished a little while ago. This is a jewelry, was intended as a jewelry cabinet, and it has a pull-out slide in the middle just below the waist molding, and graduated drawers. And it's beautiful in that you can walk all around it, and every single side has the same amount of detail. The back is paneled, but you could have it sitting in the middle of the room. And that was something I really learned from Jerry Osgood and the program at BU, was that you don't know how people are going to use these things. And in the old days, yeah, back was usually rough and it was against the wall and who cares. But with this kind of work, contemporary, it's studio furniture, it's as finished on the back and as detail-oriented on the back as it is on the front, and that's very important. This is now up at the gallery of the Soam Sound Gallery in Bar Harbor area. So this is the culmination of everything, as far as I'm concerned. 2018, I was approached by the Currier Museum of Art to do a piece for their permanent collection. They already had one of my demi-lunes, but they wanted something significant. They did not put any limitations to anything. They didn't say, oh, it's got to be this size. They wanted, because those galleries, very high ceilings, not unlike the backside of this, and they're spacious. They wanted something that would fill a room and be exceptional and not sort of get lost. So there was a lot of back and forth. I threw out some design ideas and all that. And working with the curator, Andrew Spar, we came up with this. He agreed that he would like to see this piece made. So this is the White Mountain Secretary, and I wrote about it, and Jim published it in the journal a little while ago. And this really emphasized the whole bit with the frost. So I didn't talk about that so much. The frost is the blonde or the pale version of the black ice. So the same thing with the material. It's all birch crotch veneer, which was all sawn by hand on my 1890s bandsaw. So you can still use them very effectively, even though it's old. And piecing all this and making the patterns and the forms. The patterns and the forms would fill this end of the room that were needed to do this. You see the front is bowed, so it was a very complex thing. So it really showed off the frost. And it was a chance, see again, the format of the carving. This is a maple leaf theme in the frieze, and the Gothic arch detail in the crown. So again, this is a convex form. And I gotta say, I intended to say this a long time ago, that my wife, Janet, who's here, she married me without any background in furniture except seeing what I do. She has had her hands and her eyes on everything that's come out of our shop, and that's over 300 pieces, pushing 400 pieces, where her hand touches everything. She did all of this inlay, this overlay. This is cutting and piecing one piece at a time. And the finish work is all her work. It's all off the brush. She does all the rubbing out, all the waxing, and she's as much of a craftsman as I am. She doesn't chop dovetails, although she has and she can. But her specialty, her expertise is this. And I run all my designs past her also. I consult with my wife on design, what we're going to do, which is a wonderful partnership. I'm very lucky. So, in these carvings, so I wanted to express upon these, I wanted a touch of the effect of 18th century magnificence and utilizing natural forms. So the corner carvings are these naturalistic, each side is different, but they're birch leaves, they're clusters of leaves that comfortably set on the corners. And then hanging from again, that sweep is a cluster of maple leaves. So these are all things that are important to me. They're not necessarily 18th or 19th century symbols, they're symbols of me, as is everything else in there. But I felt it was important not to do something that was extraordinarily like, oh, I've never seen anything like that before. I wasn't trying to do that, but I was trying to do something that had a level of familiarity to it. So people would come in and they would have a certain comfort and understanding about what they were looking at. But at the same time, it's a point of discovery saying, I've never seen an exterior like that. I've never seen this detail. So I wanted it to be loaded with newness, at the same time, somewhat familiar. So this is what I call the full Monty. This is everything together where you can see it all, the bow front drawers. And notice that you're not seeing any rails between the drawers. They're all blind, they're on the back. And so this was a very complex fitting aspect because you've got nothing to rest the drawers on except for one face at a time, and the drawers haven't been cut and fitted yet for support, so there's a lot of assumptions as you go forth, and they're all cock-beaded all around. Let's see if there's anything else. There's a wonderful detail. I don't know if you can see it. Probably not. But if you go to the museum, I don't think it's out right now. But from the tip of the toe, it emerges. There's a what do you call it? A chamfer that works its way up, goes through the molding, up, 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 all the way and finishes to nothing at the very top. And it's a little detail, but to me it was like one of the sweetest things about the piece, because it takes so much effort to do it. And this is the interior. So we're calling it a secretary. The museum ran out of money. So initially it was going to be drawers, it was going to be a cabinet and all that. They ran out of money and they said, you know what? We can't have a docent here all day opening and closing this thing for everyone to see. So let's just assume it's going to be closed most of the time. So don't worry about the interior. So we did a nice interior. You know, it's very thoughtful. It's got cubbies, but it could have been a lot more. But I'm not complaining. This was a magnificent opportunity. Oh, I looked at this after I loaded these photographs in the top corner. These are photos that the museum took. In that top corner, you see something's missing. For some reason, one of the people took it off during the photo session, and then it got put back on. It was back on there, but not there. So remember our house in 1986 and we moved down, that black and white? This is how we are now. And it's really filled out a lot. The driveway used to come right in front of the house. And we extended the yard, plantings all over the place, try to make it aesthetically fun for us as possible. And then the shop, the same thing. And the extension of the shop, which really isn't evident here, but we put this addition on the shop. It's 45 by 50. And it was a former mill structure up in Belmont. Took it all apart, brought it down here, put it back. It's still going on. But that was 25 years ago, I think, when that process started. But this is the interior of it. So it's all timber framed, it's beautiful. It's 19th century space, and it contains my 19th century collection of machines that I use every day or hope to use every day. There's a lot of restoration facing me. So maybe John will be getting some phone calls to help me out. But this, again, it's great, great stuff and great aesthetic. I love being surrounded because I find it so, by what I really like, because I find it so inspirational in my work. And I would like to thank you all for listening to me jabber on about all my inspiration and what I do, and thanks for being here.
Just a little token.
Oh, nice coffee mug. I need another coffee mug. This is great.
There you go.
I'll use this with pride. Thank you.
I should give you another one for your wife.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks, everybody.